Hello, and thank you to the World Architecture Festival and to the jury. My name is David Leech. I'm a director at David Leech Architects, and it was established in 2016, so just under 2 years ago. This house is the first project from my office. The house is located on the edge of Dublin city centre, about a mile from the city centre. Although it's quite close to the centre, it is context is very suburban. By that, it's typically semi-detached houses and terrace houses with front and rear gardens. Our site is unusual. It's the corner site there, but it's bounded on 3 sides by public space. So the estate road, a small public laneway, one way to the main road, and a landscape triangular space to the front. The site was originally bought by a developer who bought number 80 Hollybrook Grove, which is a house there to the left, with the intent of developing on the corner site. That developer tried twice to gain planning permission on the site, but was refused twice by the council due to the consideration of not a sufficient private outdoor amenity space or qualitative outdoor space. The developer then sold on the site to my client. This is a view from the rear laneway. And then this is a view from within the garden space. When we arrived on the site with my client, we were very impressed by this because of the fantastic privacy that the existing hedgerow, which is quite overgrown here, allowed for. And interestingly, we thought that if the council and the planner's concern was with regard to the garden, well, that would give us the opportunity to actually allow the garden to be the driver for this project. This is the proposed site plan, and we pushed the house centrally into the plot. This allowed for a garden to wrap around 4 sides of the house. The house is pushed up against the laneway to maximise the garden presence to the front and to the sides. This is the ground floor plan. The plan layout is defined by a cross-shaped core. The cross-shaped core divides a roughly square plan into 4 public spaces. The entrance hall with a library, then you have dining, kitchen, and living space working around anti-clockwise. The spaces were thought of in terms of Louis Kahn, in terms of servant and served. So the cross-shaped core houses all the ancillary functions for the public spaces: wash closet, stair, pantry, fireplace. A continuous loop of circulation grows around the perimeter of the house. And the idea for this is because the house is quite a small footprint, square meterage is 55 square meters on the ground and 55 on the first, that the continuous loop of circulation made the house feel ever expanding. To overcome the planner's concern with regard to the garden, we removed most of the structure from around the perimeter of the house into the cross-shaped core. This allowed the house to be wrapped in a timber and glass screen. That on fine days, the screen could fold back from the corners of the house to the apexes of the cross, essentially reducing the footprint of the house to a cross-shaped pavilion in the garden. This allowed for the garden then to, in terms of the quality of the space, in terms of also the size of the space, to increase. This is a view from the kitchen looking towards the dining room with the screen closed. And then this is with the screen open. And the idea here is that we didn't want it to really feel like it was the cliche of bring the inside garden, inside space out. We wanted to really blur that and have an ambiguous, what Robert Venturi would call both and. So in materiality of the interior space of the house, the floor, for instance, is meant to have a patio-like quality, as there's a struck concrete floor, but it's inlaid then with marble tiles to give it an elaboration or a richness that gives it a different sort of quality. We also like that when the door is folded back to the apex of the cross, it forces one to walk outside or underneath the canopy of the house to get back into the other room. This really emphasised the blurring of whether this space was inside or outside. We like the surreality of this, and obviously we're looking at Corbusier and the apartment in Paris. And we like the idea that on an autumnal evening, you can also fold it back and have a fire on, and all the rooms can be wrapped in curtain like a 4-poster bed as well. We also liked how the walls on the ground floor were essentially just a door thick, so 60 mil thick, and this almost evaporated the kind of very fine line between the garden and the internal spaces. So really, we weren't really trying to garden. We thought the garden as rooms, and we thought as the house as garden. This plan just describes the section. And I'll just walk you through the house along the circulation. So you step up across the threshold to enter into the house, and this is the entrance hallway. You then step down into the kitchen dining before going around the apex of the kitchen counter. The kitchen dining is on level with the garden so that the terrace and the outdoor spaces can really be fluid as you go through. This is south facing. Then you step down into the living space to maximize the head height here because this is a north facing room. And when the doors fall back, the planting here is of woodland plants to deal with shade. And there's a window seat along the side to allow someone to sit. So you have a different relationship to the garden than you do in the other areas of the house. Then stepping back up, you arrive back at the entrance where you started from, and this loop is continuous. Taking some inspiration from the suburban house, our project is seen as a contemporary translation of the suburban house, and by that we were keen that it should be economic and use materials and techniques that are appropriate and recognizable to a local builder, a local tradesman, that there was nothing high-tech in it. We also looked at arts and crafts housing and looked at how the elements recomposition can make for delightful figures, but these are just the ordinary elements of the domestic. And also looked at how reusing the ordinary things and put them into new configurations can make something feel special and new again. For example, with the pebble dash or the rough cast, which is kind of seen as a very ordinary material, we try to elevate and then exaggerate. And this is what we did with a lot of the ordinary elements, was try to amplify those qualities of domestic or exaggerate them so it became something both once familiar and new. On the outside, the house is kind of textured in one color, so it comes back to texture. We were interested in the idea of the applied arts. So here we used this, we didn't have a budget for a crafted architecture, but how we could assemble the pieces and how we express pieces made for add a layer of richness. Also, like how the chimney, for instance, here acts as a roof light as well as for the flues, etc., for ventilation and mechanical heat recovery. The elevations correspond and change depending on relation to the garden and also the orientation. We worked with the rough cast, so the rough cast was almost seen as a rustication. So on the garden side is where we have the rough cast element, and on the public faces we have it hand-troweled smooth. Because of the privacy of the hedgerow, the ground floor could be considered almost like a glass house, but because the top floor was visible from a distance, we wanted something that felt much more in keeping with the surrounding neighbours. We worked on the wall sections in terms of how the depth of the wall could play an impact on the house. On the ground floor, the glazing is flush to the garden, and on the first floor, it's set back to allow for the intimacy and protection of the bedroom spaces above. We like this in terms of the ground floor, how the flush glazing allows for the garden to be reflected and exaggerates the presence of the garden, on a small garden on the area. And then on upstairs, the walls are pushed back so that the house feels more secure. This is the house showing how it kind of relates to its neighbours in terms of materiality, slate roof, chimney, and forms. This is it in this context, so you can see the house hopefully as a cousin of the housing around it. On the rear elevation, we made a projection where the house butts against the lane. We made a projection of a gable with a window and door set in relief. We used downpipes, gutters, cowls as another element of elaboration to make it feel richer. So for instance, the downpipe is purposely shaped to make a kind of a figure. And then the small windows are elaborated in the bathroom space. The first floor is defined by taking one of the legs up the cross. Up the stair, you arrive in a small landing, which is one door wide and two doors in length, so it's a very small space. Off that doors open diagonally, you have these diagonal views to windows and more generously proportioned bedrooms. Although that landing is a small space, it's extruded in a chimney stack for a 5-meter high light well, so it feels more voluminous, or feels like a place has purpose. This is this is a view up the staircase showing the timber doors line to door height. This is looking up that light well. The view into the bedrooms, where you can see the diagonally opposite windows. In the bedrooms on the first floor, we want to introduce colour because we weren't working with the garden as much. It could be a bit more artificial. These are very cheap materials. It's MDF, coloured MDF. We couldn't afford to use timbers everywhere throughout the house. The pitch of the ceilings followed the pitch of the roof. We looked at shaker joinery to eliminate using minimal joinery detail, which requires very skilled carpenters. These joints allow for tolerance and mistakes to happen on site. similarly with the windows, I won't go into it. In the bedrooms, the linings, these MDF linings fluctuate and change to, just one more slide, to accommodate servicing. And then the last slide is the master bedroom. From here, we looked at trying to drape the ceiling so that it feels tent-like, obviously the Schinkel references, but also appropriate for sleep. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who'd like to ask the first question? Yes, Leslie.
I've never seen Pebble Dash look quite as sexy, so I think that's quite an achievement. Again, the kind of context, the suburban context, it makes it seem as if this house is a one-off, a kind of quirkiness in relation to its neighbours. How has it been received?
Well, there was a visit for an architectural association visit for the site, and a lot of people walked past the house, not thinking that it was part of the thing they were going to visit. And they were saying, and I quite like that. I like the fact that I wanted, it's almost like a schoolboy who kind of has his shirt undone and his tie sticking out. He's part of that world, but he's also kind of a little bit at odds to it. Yeah, I think it's been well received by neighbours, simply also because the site was in very bad condition beforehand, so they're just happy to get something built. Yeah.
Thank you. And what was the role of the client? Because to me it also seems a bit hybrid in the sense you refer to Le Corbusier, but I'm also thinking about Adolf Loos, for example, in the way furniture and the routing.
Well, referencing, I generally don't reference architects. I usually reference true art because I think it's more appropriate. But it was a family client, so they trust me quite a lot. They
trust you for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Free ticket to design whatever you want?
No, not at all. Not at all. But I make very large-scale models. So I make 1 to 10 models. Like we had 60 A0 drawings before we went to site. So we draw everything almost at 1 to 2 scale. There's nothing that. There's no changes on site. There's no RFIs. No changes to the budget. Everything is completely controlled. It takes a lot of effort front on, but it means that for the client, then they have complete security that when it's built.
Is it your choice or the request from the community that your design is the cousin of the community?
No, it'd be my choice. We didn't test. This is just it was an iterative process. So I didn't have an idea. We never have an idea of what the house is going to look. It just happens as we work through it, and it just came to that. So all those constraints from the council to the client to all that thing, they just mold it, and really it's kind of like almost like joining the dots.
The second question is your dining room is facing the garden, but your living room is facing a little small corner of the estate. Why not reverse?
Because I guess the living room is considered almost a drawing room in this sense. It's a sense you retreat back to in the evening where you could have a fire. That was a north-facing space where the garden was it would never get direct light, whereas the kitchen dining was considered for the family and the client to actually be where it's the family space where they use most, and they would kind of be bleeding into the garden quite a lot. It's just how they use the house. The kitchen, it hasn't shown in the photographs, but the kitchen was to have a very large table, like a seat 10, where people could do their homework and where people could eat. It was almost like a farm table, I guess, a better word.
The house has a very high-pitched roof, and I think that looks very well on the outside elevation, but it also introduces tall heights within the rooms. Doesn't that affect the climatization of those rooms? I mean, did you deliberately want the rooms to have that very dramatic space?
Well, on the first floor, where the rooms are tighter dimension, we wanted to kind of give a sense of generosity, which the volume of the ceiling, could allow for. The house is A-rated, so it's the highest rating you can get in terms of energy, and it was tested for all those elements. But yes, it was a design. There is some attic space, so if you imagine where the cross spaces are, there's a little bit of attic there, which we've used for the mechanical heat recovery system to be stored, and for a little bit of storage space, and there's a storage room downstairs, because we were very aware that people like attics because it's quite nice to store, and but the insulation line is all along the pitch. It isn't passive house, but it's not far off passive house. We couldn't get passive house because of the folding doors downstairs, the air tightness we couldn't achieve on it.
Well, thank you.
That would be one of my questions too, because you show the details. It's quite it's made in a quite contemporary way, I would say. So what does that do to the suburban house, to your opinion? The thick walls, the different type of installations that you have.
Well, I'd like to see it as part of the continuum of the suburban house. Like my practice is very interested in working with ordinary clients and the private house is often a very rarefied field with very wealthy clients doing working with artists or something like that very specific. This is just seen as trying to have architecture of the highest ambition within an everyday context. And I don't see why it's possible, really.
I mean, to follow on from that question, the suburban typology is about replicating the same thing over and over again, and this has a very kind of one-off feel about it. In terms of cost, where does this sit?
Well, in terms of costs, it was a very cheap build. So it's 1,800 a square meter. I don't know how that translates. The reason we call this richly economical. So by detailing non-minimal details, it's like how traditionally they would use skirtings to hide crudeness in joints, but also using materials like blockwork, pebble dash. That's very traditional for the local builder, but then controlling it in an applied arts way by giving them an assembly way that then it can elevate it to something that feels new and special. We would like to take it. I really believe that this could happen in housing as well, that like volume house builders, it's cheap to build as a volume house builder. There was some expense in terms of to get planning, the folding doors. That was a large expense to the house, but that allowed us to get the planning. But I guess if that wasn't a consideration, maybe that probably wouldn't have happened in the house and it might have been thought of differently on the ground floor.
Okay.
Just one more question. Dublin is very cold in the winter, right? So you have a very thick wall, and you have punctuated windows on the second floor, but on the dining room you have the folding door, which is I think the least. In terms of ventilation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how you
So that was the biggest thing to overcome in terms of Part L, which is energy conservation, which the house has an A rating for.
Yeah.
So basically, the timber itself, the glass, you can get triple glazed glass. We got it down to 0.7 watts per square meter, so that was no problem to do. But actually, the timber itself was the weak point. So the timber actually has to be, it's made up of 2 layers and insulated between. So there was a bit of work in terms of trying to get that. And interestingly, and I agree completely with it, when the house was actually, when we were looking to do Part L, there's a lot of costs in the house that went into meeting the building regulation requirements for these elements, which I think the client wasn't aware of, and we weren't so aware of how much it would be like to do all that triple glazing to separate the timbers. But it's what needs to happen. But the timber doors, you're right, that's what didn't get at the passive house though, because the ventilation, to seal it was quite tight. It's difficult to do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.